Ultrabooks have matured in a lot of ways. I mean, we've seen a tremendous shift in notebook design, build quality, and features as well. If you go back in time, let's just say maybe 5 years or so, and compare the notebooks from that day and age to what we have right now, the difference is pretty significant, and I think consumers are starting to appreciate what OEM manufacturers are coming out with their flagship design on their Ultrabooks. Now, one thing that I want to quickly mention is performance, because we really haven't seen a tremendous increase in that department for the past few years until last year when Intel decided to launch their Kaby Lake R chips, which basically incorporates quad-core 8-threaded processors into these thin and light notebooks, and it really changed the game big time. We're talking about 40% increase in performance, and luckily I was able to get my hands on the XPS 13 with both a 7th generation CPU and an 8th generation CPU, and I was able to compare the performance differences. So if you're interested in the raw results, you can check it out right over here. But today I want to compare two different types of laptops. So on one hand, we have the Dell XPS 13 featuring the Core i7 8th generation processor, and this is just a standard Ultrabook, so you can just take it to work, school, or whatnot and get work done. And on the other hand, we have this beautiful HP Spectre X360. It's a 2-in-1 convertible, so you can use it as either as a tablet or as a laptop, and it features an 8th generation Core i5 processor. So it'd be interesting to see what the performance difference is like when you compare the i5 to the i7. But most importantly, I just want to go over the build quality differences and the features and just the way how they compare to each other. So let's dive in right after this.
Are you ready? Okay, watch this. So that is what the components must feel like inside the H500P mesh by Cooler Master. Check it out in the description below. Whew.
Okay, so quick disclaimer, the XPS 13 laptop that I have over here isn't exactly the newest model that was launched this year in January. This is last year's design with just a CPU refresh, so it comes with the 8th gen CPU, but rest aside, it's exactly the same. Now, the newer model is $200 more expensive than the older model, so if you're interested in the newer design and if you want a much smaller form factor, I think going for the new model is a much better option. But if you want to save a few bucks and still get the 8th generation CPU in a pretty compact notebook, especially in the XPS lineup, you should definitely pick up the older design with the processor because it's $200 cheaper than the newer model, and it still looks gorgeous from the outside. And yeah, it looks amazing. Coming back to this comparison, let's start with the build quality and design. Both notebooks are built really well. So the XPS 13 features an aluminum unibody construction. It feels robust in the hand. Dell hasn't cut any corners when it comes to the structural integrity of the chassis, and I'm really impressed with it so far. The carbon fiber finish on the palm rest feels softer to the touch, and it doesn't get too warm while performing heavier tasks. Although be mindful that it can pick up grease and fingerprints easily, but it's fairly easier to clean with a microfiber cloth. There's also a fingerprint sensor located at the palm rest. It's a quick and secure way to log into your Windows PC, and I think we're starting to appreciate biometric authentications on notebooks these days because we're so used to them on smartphones, so it's just a much better way to include that on notebooks. The HP does come with a fingerprint sensor, but it's actually on the side, and it's not as quicker. I mean, it is pretty quick, but it's just I feel that the location on the XPS 13 is a little bit more intuitive and quicker to access. Now, Dell does offer this particular model in two different color options. So there's a standard silver model and rose gold, which oddly enough is recommended by Dell on their customization page for a $50 premium. Interesting. HP's Spectre X360 does not fall behind in build quality. The chassis is primarily constructed out of aluminum and it feels a bit lighter than the XPS, but needless to say, they're both built really well. The aluminum finish continues to spread across the interior, including the palm rest, and it's mostly comfortable to type on. HP does offer the Spectre X360 in 3 different color options. There's natural silver, dark ash silver, and that's the model I have over here, and rose gold. The last 2 options have a $10 premium. The Spectre X360 looks gorgeous in this dark ash silver model. The copper chrome accents in the hinge and the edges add some visual characteristic to the notebook, and it certainly looks unique when compared to the XPS 13. Now, given that this is a 2-in-1 device, you can easily flip this into tablet mode and you can start using it right away. And if you're working on a Word document, the on-screen keyboard pops up automatically and you can start typing on it. But my problem is that I'm not comfortable using the device. like this, because keyboards kind of get in the way. It just feels uncomfortable. The edges are a little bit too sharp. It just isn't that comfortable. And the keyboard, by the way, the physical keyboard gets disabled, so you don't have to worry about registering any presses. But yeah, it's just, I don't see myself using it this way. Although, I mean, you could use it in tent mode and start consuming content, or maybe like watch Netflix or something with friends. But again, I could do the same thing on the XPS 13 with my hinge open that way. I mean, it's, sure, I'm a little farther from the screen, but this is, I'm not sure if this is fancy. I don't know. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on 2-in-1 convertible notebooks. Are you interested in the design? I mean, is it something that you see yourself using over a traditional Ultrabook like the XPS 13? Again, let us know in the comments down below. Next up, display. So both notebooks feature IPS panels, so viewing angles and contrast ratio are right on par with what you'd expect from a panel of this type. The XPS 13 features slimmer bezels, resulting in a smaller footprint when compared to the Spectre X360, but the location of the webcam on the XPS isn't ideal for conference calls, whereas with the Spectre, it's right where it needs to be, and that's at the top. Both notebooks can be configured up to QHD plus resolution, and during my testing period, I noticed that the HP notebook was a bit on the cooler side when displaying colors, but that can easily be fixed with proper calibration. Needless to say, you wouldn't have a problem consuming content on both devices because they feature great displays. I should also mention that both notebooks feature touch support. It's a quick and easy way to interact with the content being displayed, although be mindful that both screens do exhibit a slight amount of wobble. It could be a discerning factor for some of you out there, but that's just the nature of any touchscreen laptop. The screen gets wobbly, it's super glossy, so expect a ton of fingerprints over time. The Spectre X360 comes with a stylus, so you can use it to take notes, doodle around with paint, or if you're an artist, this could be a great tool to enhance your creativity. The response time between the screen and the pen input is very minimal. It feels almost natural when jotting down quick notes, and this is an excellent addition that could help students with their productivity. Unfortunately, it isn't magnetic, meaning you won't be able to attach it to the notebook like the Surface Pro, but HP does include a nice sleeve out of the box, so you can not only use it to protect the notebook while traveling, but there's a little hook to store the stylus as well, so that's a nice touch. The keyboard on the Spectre X360 is pretty good. I found that the keys were evenly spaced out, so that's nice, but I have one problem, or one major concern, and that is the arrow keys. The top and bottom, I found that to be a little bit too narrow when compared to the left and right keys, so it's a little bit confusing when you're trying to navigate through Excel documents and folders, or just browsing the web if you're using arrow keys. And sometimes you could accidentally hit up Shift instead of the up key, so it could be an annoyance for some of you out there, but you could potentially get used to it over time. The keyboard is also backlit, but it only comes with a single step brightness adjustment, so basically on or off, and it isn't bright enough when compared to the XPS. The keys, on the other hand, feature great tactile feedback, nothing too much to complain about. The travel distance is pretty short, but that's to be expected from a chiclet style keyboard. The trackpad is also really good. The surface is pretty smooth for navigation, and it uses Synaptics drivers instead of Windows Precision, so you lose quite a bit on gesture controls. However, I found the integrated primary left and right buttons were a little bit further apart due to the long width of the trackpad. Now, when you're using a single hand for navigation, you would need to physically move your hand to actuate the left button. It's honestly not a deal breaker, but it's something worth mentioning. Switching gears to the XPS 13, and the layout is well thought out. The keys are nicely spaced out and they feature great tactile feedback. It isn't the best keyboard that I've come across on a notebook, but you'll get used to it eventually. It is also backlit with 3-step adjustments, including the ability to turn it off. The arrow keys are uniform and consistent, so there's little confusion when navigating through documents, unlike the Spectre. Dell has also done a phenomenal job with the trackpad on the XPS 13. The surface is super smooth for navigation. It's not too wide when compared to the Spectre X360, so you can easily reach the integrated left and right buttons. Plus, it uses Windows Precision drivers, so you can take advantage of gesture controls built inside Windows 10, and the tracking is just perfect. I have nothing to complain about. Great job, Dell. Port selection on the Spectre X360 is a bit compromised, so you only get a single USB 3.1 Type A port, combo audio jack, power button, as well as a micro SD card reader on the left side, And switching over to the left, you get two USB Type-C Thunderbolt 3 ports, and you can use one of them to charge the laptop, as well as a fingerprint reader and a volume rocker. Now, they could have easily added an extra USB Type-A port because if you're using an external hard drive and if you have a wireless mouse that uses a wireless receiver, well, then you'd be out of ports because you can only use either one of them, or you would have to get a Type-C to Type-A adapter, and you kind of have to approach the dongle life, and that's something that I'm not willing to take as of, or at least at the time of making this video, because I don't like dongles. Now, another thing I want to point out is the inclusion of a micro SD card reader. I'm not really sure who would actually take advantage of that, because I'm pretty sure most cameras, not smartphones, but most DSLR digital cameras take SD card, full-size SD card readers. So if you're trying to edit a photo, or if you're trying to transfer media from a full-size SD card reader to the laptop, well, you'd be out of luck because the micro SD card reader is of no use. So I would have preferred a full-size SD card reader on the Spectre X360, but it is what it is, and perhaps you could just include, I mean, if you want to expand the storage, you could potentially pick up a 256 or 512, or I think a 400 gigabyte micro SD card reader and just expand your storage that way. Now, with the XPS 13, you get standard power in, a single USB Type-C Thunderbolt 3 port, full-size USB 3.1 Type-A port, combo audio jack, and a subtle LED indicator to monitor the battery life. Switching over to the right side, you get Kensington lock, another USB Type-A port, and a full-size SD card reader. Thank you, Dell. I do want to take this time to appreciate HP for including a nice sleeve to protect the laptop while traveling, but also a USB Type-C to HDMI 2.0 adapter. So if you want to connect this thing to an external display, you can do it right away without having to fetch around on Amazon looking for one. Whereas with the XPS 13, you only get the laptop and charger, and that's pretty much it. So there's no sleeves or adapters or whatnot. But Dell does offer accessories at a premium cost. So that's something that you can look into. Now, how do the integrated speakers on both these notebooks sound? Let's actually start with the HP Spectre X360. So they've partnered with Bang & Olufsen to create a pretty immersive experience. So we've got two drivers at the front in this front grille. I like the projection of it, so it's not like hidden at the bottom where it completely distorts or mutes the sound. It's nice and clear, so when you're listening to music tracks, it is pretty audible, and I haven't noticed distortion at higher volumes, which is great. But what's interesting is that when you're trying to use it in tablet mode, and if you're watching TV shows or something like that, the audio doesn't get distorted because now you've got the speakers from the bottom that are firing up to give you a pretty cool experience. So you're not really losing a lot when you're converting between different modes when it comes to audio, which is great, and they sound excellent too. Now with the XPS 13, it is great. It's definitely not as good as the Spectre X360 because you've got multiple speakers here on this laptop, but I would definitely consider this as a great speaker on an Ultrabook. It's not the best, but I've listened to a lot on gaming notebooks, and I would definitely give this a pass. Okay, so I think it's about time to get into the performance segment, comparing the i5 to the i7 model, and check out what the performance difference is. But do note that you can configure both these laptops up to an i7 processor or even an i5, but I just wanted to test out how good the i7 processor is when compared to the i5. So let me quickly run over the specs. With the XPS 13, you're getting an i7-8550U quad-core hyper-threaded processor. Comes with the base clock of 1.8 GHz and a turbo boost up to 4 GHz. You've also got 16 gigabytes of memory, clocked at 2133 MHz, and a 512 gigabyte SSD, that's NVMe. Switching gears to the Spectre X360, it comes with an 8th generation Core i5-8250U quad-core hyper-threaded processor. Comes with a base clock of 1.6 GHz that can turbo boost up to 3.8 GHz, so it's a little bit slower than the i7, but that's to be expected from an i5. It comes with 8 gigabytes of RAM, clocked at 2133 MHz, and a 256 gigabyte NVMe SSD. I do have to point out that both notebooks have their RAM soldered onto the PCB, so it's not user replaceable. So if you pick up the 16 gigabyte variant, then you should be good, but if you pick up the 8 gigabyte model on either of these notebooks, you'll be out of luck when you're trying to upgrade the RAM. However, the storage drives, so the NVMe PCI SSDs, are user replaceable. So if you go with the base model, 256 gigabyte model, then you can definitely upgrade that to a 512 gigabyte variant, or even go as far as 1 terabyte if you pick up some maybe like a Samsung 960 Pro SSD or something like that. All right, so here are some numbers. Our first round of basic synthetic test shows that the i7-8550U isn't that far ahead when compared to the i5-8250U. We're talking maybe 1 to 2% increase, especially with programs like Cinebench R15 in the multi-core test. This makes total sense because they're both featuring the exact same architecture with the same number of thread count. Now switching over to the OpenGL test, there is a bit of difference between the two, and that's due to the slightly lower clock speed on the UHD graphics found on the i5 CPU. Taking a look at some real-world tests, both 8th-gen CPUs are pretty close to each other. You would notice a significant increase in performance if you bump up to the i7 model. Both are excellent for multitasking, especially with intensive applications like Handbrake, Luxmark, GIMP, and Pulvere. Now, I wouldn't recommend editing videos on both these machines since the lack of a dedicated GPU severely affects render times, but if you were to give it a shot anyway, the Core i7 takes a slight lead here. In this case, I ran a 1-minute 4K H.264 export using Premiere Pro CC 2017, and the i5-8250U took a minute and a half longer to render when compared to the i7-8550U. I also pushed the integrated graphics on both models, and all I can say is that both CPUs are pretty capable of playing games at 1080p at lower settings. So take Overwatch for instance. At 1080p set to low, it gave us around 68 frames per second on the i7 found on the XPS 13 when compared to 57 frames per second on the i5 found on the Spectre X360. As for temperatures, this one was pretty surprising to me. Remember, both these notebooks feature a quad-core processor with hyperthreading, and they come with a TDP of 15 watts. The i7-8550U found on the XPS 13 ran about 95C during my stress test when compared to 80C on the i5 found on the Spectre. That's a pretty significant difference between the i7 and the i5 CPUs, but I can't conclude as to which notebook can cool these new 8th generation processors. So if you configure the XPS 13 with an i5 processor, it would obviously run a lot lower in temperatures, but it'd also be a lot quieter. But I can't really say the same thing with the Spectre X360. Say, for example, if you want to get the i7 model, you could potentially run into overheating issues down the line. The CPU could get toasty. So I would recommend picking the i5 model. If I were you, if you're worried about temperatures, I would stay safe and pick the i5 model. You're really not losing a lot in terms of performance, and you've seen that with the results. And plus, it'd be a lot cheaper to invest as well. So that's something to keep in mind. And this brings us to our last test, battery life. Now do note that both these notebooks feature a 61-hour battery, and our heavy load test consists of running real bench on a loop until the battery is completely depleted. Interestingly, the XPS 13 lasted a bit longer than the Spectre X360, even with a Core i7 processor, but during our light load test, where I looped refreshing a web page, I noticed that the Spectre X360 with the 8th gen Core i5 processor, it lasted an hour and 40 minutes longer than the XPS 13. These are great results, by the way, because it really proves that Intel has done a terrific job balancing performance and power efficiency with these new mobile Kaby Lake R CPUs. Alright, so the last thing that I want to cover is acoustic performance, and I have to give that to the Spectre X360 from HP. This is by far probably the most quietest notebook that I've ever come across or tested here in the studio. It just runs dead silent during idle situations, especially when browsing the web and just watching videos in general. Whereas with the XPS 13, the fans do kick in when you're trying to watch a video and perhaps browsing the web here and there. You can definitely hear the fan ramp up. But I do have to point out that this is an i7 variant and this is an i5 variant. So if you swap things up, so for example, if you get the i7 model on the Spectre X360, I'm not really sure how that would affect both temperatures and acoustics. Same goes for the XPS 13. You could expect lower temperatures and perhaps better acoustics when you pick up the i5 variant. So I really can't conclude on that part, but generally speaking, with the i5 model on the Spectre X360, the acoustic performance is pretty amazing. So that pretty much wraps up this comparison between the XPS 13 and the Spectre X360 from HP. I'd definitely love to hear your thoughts on both these laptops and the performance difference between the i5 and the i7 model. Would you consider bumping that up? Or if you're configuring either of these notebooks, would you consider bumping these specifications to an i7, or would you just stick with the i5 model? Quick note, Dell does offer the XPS 13 and a 2-in-1 factor, so it's the same form factor or convertible, so you can convert it to a tablet or laptop. And HP does offer the Spectre in just the notebook variant. So if you're just looking for a notebook, you can definitely pick it up. But I just wanted to sort of start the conversation as to, would you rather pick up a 2-in-1 device when compared to a standard Ultrabook? Or do you see the benefits of using a 2-in-1 in your day-to-day lives? Let me know in the comments down below. I'm Igor with HardwareCanucks. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. And that was a card that just, damn it.